Back to the channel, everybody. Today is Thursday, August 20th. We are now 75 days away from the elections in November. This is going to be another presidential election video. The reason we are skipping over, we usually do, we alternate between presidential and Senate election prediction videos. The reason we're doing all presidential election videos this time around is because we are in the middle of the Democratic National Convention, and also because this is the 75-day mark. And I think it's very important to mention this, because we often talk about how, long term these races are, how slowly they develop, things of that nature. And 75 days is pretty darn soon. And it's very important that everybody realizes that. That is less than 3 months away. Okay, we're about 2.5 months away now. In fact, we're slightly less than that. And that is going to go by in a flash. Okay, a lot of political activists and people that have been strategists and things of that nature have talked about the last 75 days of a campaign being the quote-unquote final stretch. It's not necessarily the 100-day mark or even the 50-day. It's the 75-day mark is when a lot of political figures talk about it being the quote-unquote home stretch and the final link. It's like we're rounding third base now. And so it's very, very important that people realize that. And if you're, getting your voting arrangements in place, that you get on that. Again, that's not a political statement. It's just important that, people participate. So here we go. We're going to get through all 50 states. As I normally do, we're going to talk about a little bit of a summary of where things are standing before we get into the actual prediction. This race is beginning to narrow up a little bit more each day. Some of Joe Biden's previously very large leads have begun to dwindle, let's put it ever so slightly. And so that is a little bit concerning for the Joe Biden campaign and the Donald Trump campaign, especially because, remember, they're going second in the convention. Remember, 4 years ago it was the opposite, where Donald Trump won first, the Democrats went second. There is sort of this overlying thesis that the party that goes second typically gets an advantage because it's a little bit more fresh in voters' minds. Who knows if that really means anything? I don't know if there's any data to back that up. But today that we had a lot of polling that was released that had Joe Biden leading in a couple swing states. He also led in Texas in another poll. But some of those margins are shrinking little by little. So here we are 75 days away, and Donald Trump appears to be making up some ground. He's still down, but he's making up ground. So let's get into it. All 50 states, as we always do. State of Hawaii, we talked about how there was that rally, like Hawaiians for Trump or whatever it was called, that got some buzz on social media, went viral on YouTube and things of that nature. That's not to say that there's really any reason to believe Hawaii is in any kind of danger for the Democrats. Alaska, we've broken this down many times, how the state of this race is very bizarre, considering in this state the Democratic Party always outperforms the presidential candidate. They typically have some success in some statewide races, whether that be for governor, for senator, or the House race here. But this time it's the opposite. Al Gross has really not managed to generate any buzz up here. And of course, he's an independent. The Lincoln Project has also been working that race out here. Dan Sullivan even had that gaffe that we've talked about where he posted a picture of him standing with Elijah Cummings while trying to make a tribute post to the late John Lewis. That doesn't appear to have, given him any kind of suffering in the polls. And meanwhile, Donald Trump continues to lead here, but only by about a lean, sometimes even tilt margin. So keep an eye on that, because as we know, Alaska is a state that can just sort of bounce your way sometimes, because it's a very hard state to poll, and it's very difficult to always know exactly what the pulse of this state is. So just keep a little bit of an eye on that. The Joe Biden campaign does consider it a competitive state this time around, but I'm going to label it likely. Washington's safe state, as we know that the protests up there, the whole thing with Chaz, as they've been calling it, the whole thing, as if Washington was in any kind of concern for the Democratic Party. That's obviously not going to happen. This time around, the Democrats continue to be in a very solid position there. Jay Inslee, the incumbent governor who ran for president, is also up for re-election. He is easily going to win re-election. In the state of Oregon, obviously what's going on in Portland puts this beyond any shadow of a doubt, as if it really wasn't any doubt. And obviously California, Look, the Republican Party continues to have a pretty strong presence in California between Kevin McCarthy, Devin Nunes. Now it's shrunk, obviously, because they lost Dana Rohrabacher, who was defeated in the House. They lost Steve Knight in the House. They lost a couple others in the House as well. They did pick up that Senate seat or that House seat back that Katie Hill won. But obviously, the Republican Party, for what is obviously a very safe Democratic state, did I think has done a pretty decent job, all things considered, in terms of preventing this from shifting ever so slightly to the right. Whereas Texas, which has often been called sort of the Republican Party's California, is the opposite. So California, obviously, even before the Kamala Harris pick, 55 safe votes for the Democrats. In the state of Nevada, we've broken this down as well. How Catherine Cortez Masto, I believe she's the senior senator, is generating some national interest. She chairs the committee, whatever the equivalent to the RNSC is. I don't believe it's called the DNSC, the Democratic National Senatorial Committee, whatever that is officially called. She chairs that. I'll be sure to look that up before the next video. And so she has been talked about as a potential, maybe down the line, a presidential, candidate as she continues to generate more buzz. She was on some initial shortlists for vice president. She has been talked about as a potential cabinet position, things of that nature. She may eventually chair some committees in the Democratic Party should they eventually take back the Senate. In the meantime, if they don't take back the Senate, I imagine she will be named the ranking member of at least one committee. So that is obviously something to keep in mind. And at the same time, the Democrats kind of put to rest any doubts that this was not a blue state altogether at this point. Dean Heller was ousted by Jackie Rosen, and Steve Sisolak was able to flip the governorship back from red to blue. Again, don't forget, there were 7 states that flipped from red to blue in their governorships: Nevada, New Mexico, Kansas, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Maine. The Republicans flipped Alaska from blue to red. So Nevada, even though it'll probably end up being a lean or a likely margin, I'm going to label it safe Democrat. Idaho, we've talked about how the Democrats are seeing the first signs of life in this state. Some of their more recent races have had them creep up near that 40% mark, 38, 39%. Now, obviously, that's far from a close race. But what it is showing that there are some areas of this state that are trending leftward. Boise is basically the only, you wouldn't even really call it major, but the only real concise urban area in the entire state, really in this entire region of the country for that matter. And the Democrats now have a Democratic mayor elected there. In some of the big statewide races, they can actually carry the county by a very small margin, but they can carry the county. And as a result, if that continues to grow, if Boise continues to grow, and there is such a thing as suburban voting eventually in this state, keep an eye on Idaho. I'm not saying it's going to be a blue state or even a purple state really anytime soon, but this could have pretty soon be a state that you start to look at and say, okay, is this maybe a little more like Tennessee, or maybe a little more like South Carolina, as opposed to, basically a clone of West Virginia or Wyoming. So keep an eye on Idaho. On the final margin, it'll be interesting to see what the data is. Utah, safe state. Now, obviously, what we do want to point out is that the Mitt Romney factor is very important here. Not to mention, we've seen how Utah voters very consistently enjoy voting for third-party candidates. Remember, Evan McMullin got 1 out of every 5 votes back in 2016 in this state. Mitt Romney has all but endorsed, has he in fact endorsed Joe Biden? I'm not sure. He's definitely not supporting Donald Trump. We know that. Voters here, love him to death. They easily elected him back to the Senate. He is far more liked in the state of Utah than Mike Lee is, certainly. So, I think it's possible, maybe, because remember we did have that one poll that had Biden down by only 3 points here. I think it's possible that Biden gets within single digits in this state if he has like a really good day, but it'll probably end up being a likely margin. So I'm going to label it safe just because there's no way it'll flip. Now in Arizona, this is the one that is starting to become worrisome for the Democrats. Now think about that in a nutshell. The fact that I'm saying it's worrisome for the Democrats really tells you all you need to know about what has happened to this state. Because this was, for years, a Republican bastion. Not since '92 have the Democrats won the state of Arizona on the presidential level. And it's continued to be a state that has shifted leftward and leftward and leftward. Remember, Donald Trump won the state by far less than he was expected to. Okay, he only won with a plurality of the vote here. Hillary Clinton captured 45.1% of the vote, I believe was the final tally. Doug Ducey remains the incumbent Republican governor. he's a staunch Trump supporter. Okay, so that is worth something when talking about what is the pulse of this state right now. But Martha McSally, who was appointed to that open Senate seat by the governor, lost. Okay, in 2018 to Kyrsten Sinema. Okay, that was an open seat, and she lost to Kyrsten Sinema. So the Democrats picked up a Senate seat there. They also picked one up in Nevada after losing 4 others in North Dakota, Indiana, Florida, and Missouri. Okay. Since then, Doug Ducey committed political suicide, not necessarily for himself, but maybe for his party on the senatorial level, in that he appointed Martha McSally back to the other open seat. Remember, John McCain and Jeff Flake used to be the 2 senators here. They're both gone. They were both at different times open seats. I think this Senate race, in fact, is actually considered officially a special election as a result. And right now, it still looks as though Mark Kelly, even though we've seen a little bit of a narrowing, Mark Kelly, the former veteran, the former astronaut, is going to win that Senate seat. Remember, there are also more Democrats now in the House of Representatives from the state of Arizona than there are Republicans. They also made some state legislature gains the Democrats did back in 2018. The most recent poll from On Message Incorporated, which is a respected pollster, had Kelly and McSally actually tied. Okay, now that was only 400 voters. So that is, again, worth mentioning, like what the state of the race really is. That sort of puts you in the position of Martha McSally. Imagine being very excited and relieved and happy to find that you have only tied Mark Kelly in one poll that only surveyed 400 voters. Okay, that's important. Okay, and the most recent poll before that was a Change Research poll that also only had 428, but had Kelly up by 6 points. And the one before that, 11 points, and the one before that, 5 points. Okay, the most recent presidential poll had Donald Trump, also by On Message Inc., up by 3 points. Okay, so that definitely means that this poll just captured a certain number of Republican voters more than Democratic voters. Again, when you see those kind of consistent decisions on one pollster, particularly on a small sample size, that kind of tells you what you need to know. So all things considered, this is still in the Democratic Party's column at the moment. Okay, but right now, remember, recently we downgraded this from lean to tilt. Okay, so the Democrats are obviously spending quite a bit of money here. There's some talk that the 2024 convention, the Democratic convention, could be in Phoenix, which I think would be a really interesting strategic choice for them. So keep an eye on this state. Right now, the Republicans are starting to make up ground there. Keep an eye on it. New Mexico's safe Democratic state. Ben Ray Lujan is also going to win that open Senate seat. Colorado, we've talked about many times how Cory Gardner is probably the most vulnerable Republican senator. He is in all likelihood going to lose to John Hickenlooper, who could not have been a better recruiting target for the Democrats to run for this Senate seat. They were initially a little disappointed that he decided to briefly run for president because they were convinced that they could take this seat. And I will say, for the record, I think even a fairly weak Democratic candidate would beat Cory Gardner. Cory Gardner is very unpopular in this state. This is a blue state at this point. I know 538 still has it listed as a swing state. Let's be honest, it really isn't. Okay, this is a Democratic state. The Republicans can get around 45% of the vote here. I think after this race, assuming Cory Gardner loses, which we have no reason to assume anything else, it will basically be like Virginia, in that the margins will sort of indicate that it's closer than what you might think. It might put you closer than when you sort of associate being a safe state. But the Democrats are just going to keep on winning elections here. Okay, they were able to replace John Hickenlooper with Jared Polis. Nothing to really worry about it for the Democrats here. Okay, and on the presidential level, it's easily going to go to Joe Biden. In the state of Wyoming, it is worth mentioning, I think, that in this state, the Democratic Party basically doesn't exist here. Okay, I mean, there's Liz Cheney up. I mean, there's really no reason to even talk about this state. It's the safest state, maybe other than D.C., and of course, D.C. isn't a state. I would say this is probably the safest state of any party on any level. Okay, now in Montana, we've mentioned before how on the other races, the Senate race, the governor race, the House race, these are all very competitive. Obviously, the presidential one, it just isn't. Okay, the Democrats, similarly in Alaska, are able to do very well on the state level here. Remember, there has been a Democratic governor of the state of Montana since 2000. Think about that. And they're going for it again with Mike Cooney, but so far he is down to Greg Gianforte, who is relinquishing that House seat, and that seat is being pursued by Kathleen Williams, a Democrat, and Matt Rosendale, the Republican. Meanwhile, Steve Bullock, the current governor of Montana, is running for the Senate against Steve Daines. And it would be really something if the Democrats had both senators from a ruby red state. That is one of their crucial flip opportunities. The others being Arizona, Colorado, maybe Kansas, Georgia, North Carolina, Iowa, and Maine. So they have a lot of opportunities for sure, and they're going to have plenty more in 2022 as well. But on the presidential level, Montana remains safe. North Dakota, safe. South Dakota, safe. Nebraska, safe. We've talked about this area of the country. Some of the statewide races can teeter a little bit, particularly in South Dakota. And let's not forget that the Democrats had a senator in North Dakota for many, many years, but not anymore. Kansas, don't worry about it if you're the Republicans. There was some concern after Chris Kobach lost that race to Laura Kelly and then tried it again by running for the Senate. He didn't even make it out of the primary against Roger Marshall. Don't worry about that if you're the Republicans. Oklahoma, we did see the Democrats win that one competitive House seat. They'll probably lose that this time around. It's going to go to the Republicans either way. Now, in Texas, this continues to be a hard state to exactly figure out because it's difficult to really gauge whether or not this is indeed a purple state just yet. The idea that it's a blue state now is completely wrong. The idea that it's a purple state, I think, is also just a little bit wrong. Look, Beto O'Rourke was about as good a candidate as you could possibly field if you're the Democrats. Okay, he was an extremely enthusiastic, popular, well-spoken, lifelong Texan who had held office out here in the El Paso area and who was challenging one of the most unpopular senators in the country. Ran a great campaign, raised a buttload of money, visited all 254 counties famously, and he still lost. Okay, he still lost. Now, he came pretty close, came within 2 points, but he still lost. Okay, the Democrats also lost the governorship election here. And there's the other Senate seat, John Cornyn, is up this time. He's going to win. He's going to beat MJ Hager. The Democrats have not won a statewide race in the state of Texas, not an attorney general race, not a Supreme Court race, not a Senate race, not a governor race since the 90s. Okay? So why should we really believe otherwise? Well, Joe Biden is obviously doing extremely well amongst Latino voters. The question is are those people going to vote? Okay, that is the question. Now, there was a poll that I mentioned in the open that had just today that got released right at the 75-day mark that again had Biden leading in the state of Texas. A Global Strategy Group poll, 700 voters were surveyed. Biden 47%, Trump 45%. That is at least the 7th or 8th poll that Joe Biden has won in the state of Texas. Okay, this is going to be a tight one. Okay, but I do expect Donald Trump to edge this one out. I would say 51.2 to 48.8. Okay, real close. And 4 more years of demographic shifts. Ted Cruz will be up again in 4 years. Greg Abbott will be up in 2. I think the Democrats will really gear up hard for that Senate race against Ted Cruz in 4 years. Keep an eye on that. But right now, I'm still going to label it tilt Republican. Minnesota, it's going to be safe. The Republicans have lost any opportunity to flip this state after going 0 for 3 in the midterms in 2018. And obviously what we saw in the Minneapolis area over the last 3-4 months is pushing it further over the top for the Democrats. Iowa, the Democrats might well win this Senate race here. Teresa Greenfield is quietly leading Teresa Greenfield in that race. And the governorship race between Fred Hubble and Kim Reynolds in 2018 narrowed up significantly from the presidential election. And the Democrats, as we know, have 3 out of the 4 House districts in the state. The 4th was up here in the northwest portion of Iowa. That was for many years represented by Steve King, and he was easily primaried out. So, but on the presidential level, I think it's too much of a ground to make up. I don't see how Donald Trump is going to lose that much ground. And I also don't think the Democrats are that focused on this state. They're focused on the Rust Belt. They're focused on Ohio. They're very focused on Florida, on North Carolina, and Arizona. And they just don't need Iowa that much. And so I don't see them putting that much resources into this one. They certainly are in the Senate race. But as of now, I don't think it's strategically sensible for them to do that. And as a result, I think they're following suit. Now, in the state of Missouri, We've talked about how before there have been some studies done that have suggested that if all of Kansas City was in Missouri and not half of it was in Kansas, and all of St. Louis was in Missouri and not half of it being in Illinois, this could well be a blue state. Remember, Barack Obama came up 4,000 votes short of winning this state in 2008. Now, since then, it obviously shifted very far to the right from there for Mitt Romney, and certainly far more for Donald Trump. And then in 2018, Claire McCaskill was, I wouldn't say easily defeated, but it wasn't that close either, by Josh Hawley, a notable Trump supporter. So Missouri, Mike Parson is also up. I'm going to label it likely, but only because that'll probably be the final margin and not because there's really any doubt as to where the state will go. Arkansas, we're not going to talk about it. Louisiana, it does have a Democratic governor. Okay, let's not overlook that. John Bel Edwards remains a Democratic governor there. The Landrieux obviously still have a pretty good influence in this state, a lot of clout in this state. There have been talks of Mitch Landrieu running for Senate, for governor, what have you. By the way, Bill Cassidy, I believe just today, it was revealed that he tested positive for COVID-19. And what is that? Between him and Louis Gohmert and Herman Cain, it's a number of high-profile Republicans, Rand Paul, a number of high-profile Republicans that have contracted the virus. So, but on the presidential level, we're going to remain safe. Mississippi, again, the highest minority population state in the country. And as a result, that is going to reduce this down to a likely margin. Again, don't forget either that Mike Espy is challenging Cindy Hyde-Smith to a rematch. Mike Espy did a pretty good job in that special election a few years back. He lost, I believe the final tally was 54-46, which for a very safe Republican state is a pretty good number to get over that 45% threshold. He's giving it another shot. Cindy Hyde-Smith is not that well approved of. She's generally disliked. But again, these states have identities, and we have no reason to believe, even in a high turnout year with a very high African-American population turnout coming, or expected rather, in this state, we shouldn't expect Mike Espy to be able to pull that, and we shouldn't expect Donald Trump to lose it either. In the state of Alabama, it's going to be safe. Tommy Tuberville is also going to beat Doug Jones, probably by more than 12 or 13 points. The Democrats are not that focused on that Senate race anyway. They're far more focused on the ones I outlined earlier. So they're probably not going to spend too much time on that now. In Florida, okay, we got a lot to break down here. Obviously, the state of Florida has been one of the biggest battleground states. It's maybe the battleground state in the United States, okay? Obviously what happened in 2000, the whole election came down to that state, just as it kind of did that way in Ohio in 2004. Remember, not since the days of Lawton Chiles have the Democrats had a Democratic governor in the state of Florida. 4 straight Republican governors, okay? Kind of similarly in the reverse in Montana, okay? Jeb Bush, Charlie Crist, who of course is now a Democrat, Rick Scott, and Ron DeSantis. 4 out of the last 4 are all Republicans, with the exception, sort of Charlie Crist, who has switched parties and is now a House member out here in I believe, Hillsborough County. The Republicans, though, they won it by about 113,000 votes back in 2016 on the presidential level, which is good for a little more than a point. In 2018, the Democrats were extremely bullish about their chances here. They fielded a great candidate in Andrew Gillum, the former mayor of Tallahassee, who challenged Ron DeSantis, who was a former congressman from somewhere down here in the South Florida area. I'm not exactly sure where. And Ron DeSantis won that race by 0.4 of a point, 49.6 to 49.2. Rick Scott, who was the former governor, also challenged Bill Nelson, the longtime Democrat in the state, for the Senate, and he won as well. It was even closer there, 50.1 to 49.9. You literally cannot get closer than that. So that, the final results there really show you just how airtight the results can be here. The Democrats did pick up a couple House seats down here in the South Florida area. Debbie McCarcel-Powell, Donna Shalala, in the South Florida area were able to flip a couple House seats, help the Democrats get that majority. But in the 2 big statewide races, the Republicans also won the Attorney General race. That was pretty convincing for them. Not to mention, this was a state that saw quite a bit of Democratic-led activism after the Parkland school shooting. So that was a big sigh of relief. However, Joe Biden is wiping Donald Trump away in the polls in this state. Remember, Joe Biden went 2 for 2. Okay, it wasn't just Barack Obama that won the 29 electoral votes in the state of Florida in 2008 and 2012. Joe Biden won them as well. Okay, I mean, let's look at the most recent polls. 49 to 49 in the most recent On Message Inc. poll. Biden by 6, tie. Biden by 4, Biden by 7, Biden by 3, Biden by 3, Biden minus 1, Biden plus 5, Biden plus 13, Biden plus 6, Biden plus 7, Biden plus 10, Biden plus 6, tie, plus 5, plus 9, plus 6, plus 4. So you get the idea. That's all the way back to late June. And so you get the idea. Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump down here. Of course, Donald Trump now does consider this his home state, and any convention bump, mind you, that Trump was expected to get has been lost, because he was expected, he moved his convention out of Charlotte and down into Jacksonville, and he has since changed that as well. So now they're just holding it remotely. So right now I have it lean Democrat. I just do. I mean, we've seen, too much evidence to suggest that Joe Biden is 100% in control in this state. And listen, Joe Biden doesn't actually absolutely have to win this state. He really these are sort of his base states that he is very focused on, whereas Donald Trump absolutely has to win this state. If Donald Trump loses Florida, he is done. Okay, I don't care if he holds on in North Carolina, Ohio, Iowa, even wins one or maybe even 2 of the Rust Belt states, holds on in Texas, maybe shocks the world in New Hampshire as well. He is losing if he loses Florida, so just keep that in mind. Georgia has also been a state to keep in mind about. I remember the Democrats came up short in the governorship race there, a controversial race. Stacey Abrams got 48% of the vote here, but Brian Kemp did win that race. Both Senate seats are up this time. The Republicans are very much going to win one of them, the special election. It's a jungle system, and as of now, it looks like the Republicans are going to have both of their candidates advance to the runoff, guaranteeing they will keep the seat. It'll just be a matter of whom. Whereas the other Senate seat is far more competitive, and it's between Jon Ossoff and David Perdue. Jon Ossoff, the Democrat, remember, he was the candidate in the most expensive House race in United States history, real on in Donald Trump's term. He ended up losing that race. It was a highly conservative seat, but he did lose that race. Now, Perdue is still the favorite in this race, and he should be. He continuously leads Ossoff in the polls, although the most recent poll had Ossoff up by 2 points. And even the ones that Perdue has been leading in, they've been tight. Okay, so let's go through some of the most recent polls. Ossoff plus 2, tie. Perdue plus 3, Ossoff plus 3. Perdue plus 2, Perdue plus 8, Perdue plus 7, Perdue plus 6. Okay, those are Monmouth University polls. And then a Morning Consult poll that had Perdue by 3. So obviously Perdue remains in the lead here. Okay, the last 2 had a tie and then an Ossoff plus 2. I would say Ossoff wins probably 1 out of every 4 polls in this state. So on the senatorial level, the Democrats remain hopeful that they can get this one flipped, but by and large, I don't think that they're too focused on it, as opposed to, again, the southwestern states, Montana, Maine, etc. In 2022, there's quite a bit of buzz because Stacey Abrams could very well run again, and Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, has also been swept up into a lot of national conversations as well. But on the presidential level, I still expect Trump to pull this out by a tilt margin. South Carolina, we've talked about how it's tightening up a little bit on the senatorial level, but on the presidential, I'm going to label it safe. It'll probably end up being a likely margin. Okay, because I think the Democrats will crack the 45% mark. They have a pretty decent presence in the state between Jamie Harrison, Jim Clyburn. Joe Cunningham also represents one of those coastal seats in the House for the first time in many, many years. So I think they will crack 45%, but there's been so much more buzz, and I think is warranted for the Democrats possibly flipping the state. They're not going to. Okay, don't get your hopes up there if you're the Democrats. Tennessee, safe Republican state. North Carolina. For the first time, I am changing this characterization. I am labeling this tilt Republican. Now, I know that is going against everything I have said up to this point about this state, but the reason I'm doing this is because what we have seen is a consistent kind of a keeping of the head above water for Donald Trump in this state, as opposed to the other races that are happening in North Carolina. There's a lot going on in this state. Okay, there are 2 House districts in the southern portion of the state right along the South Carolina border that are expected to flip from red to blue. So that obviously favors the Democrats. Roy Cooper, the Democratic governor, very popular. He's easily going to defeat Dan Forest, probably by over 12 to 15 points. That's also going to help the Democratic Party. There's also a Senate race going on here between Cal Cunningham and Tom Tillis, and Cal Cunningham has completely taken control of that race as well. But keep an eye, though, on the presidential races here. Okay, the polling at 538 has Biden leading by 1.4 percentage points. But let's look through this. The most recent one, tie. Biden +1, Trump +1. Trump +2, Trump +1, Biden by 3, Biden +10, Biden +4, Biden +2, Biden +4. Now remember, this is going backwards. Okay, so that is further evidence of the fact that this is also tightening up a little bit. And if we're seeing other races go the Democratic Party's way, but not necessarily the presidential one, that is telling. Okay, that is revealing. And it usually goes the other way around, where the presidential race is the one that is sort of trickling down into some of the other statewide races. That's not what's happening. It's happening in the reverse. So for the first time, I'm labeling this a tilt Republican. Kentucky, safe Republican state. West Virginia, safe Republican state. Virginia has become a safe Democratic state. I believe JHK still has this listed as a swing state. They're crazy for doing that. Okay, the Democrats have the governorship, both senators, and the state legislature control. They also will easily win the presidency here, just as they did in 08 and 2012. I mean, the Republicans haven't won a statewide race here in going on many years now. Okay, in Illinois, safe Democratic state. That's another big base state for them. So there's another 20 votes for them. Dick Durbin is going to be fine. Tammy Duckworth also entered the national conversation quite a bit, didn't she? In the vice presidential sweepstakes. She also appeared at the DNC just tonight, in fact. Indiana, safe Republican state. Remember, Barack Obama did win it in 2008, but since that was sort of a one-off, a little bit of a fluke, since then, Mike Pence and the Republicans have taken over complete control in the state. And remember, they did get that Senate seat back after Joe Donnelly held it. And then he lost to, I believe, Mike Braun is his name. Now, in Ohio, we'll get to the Rust Belt in a minute. Remember, Barack Obama and Joe Biden carried this both times, 2008 and 2012. The union presence here in this state is beginning to die off little by little. And that is conducive to a slow shift towards the Republican Party. Remember, this is an overarching theme happening here. The northern portion of the country is shifting rightward. The southern portion is shifting leftward. Now, the reason that's better for the Democrats and the Republicans is because the only reason that's happening is because more people are moving out of the north to the south. And so obviously the more people there are in a certain area, it's no secret, the data just backs it up, that the urban areas overwhelmingly vote Democratic. And so the less people that are present in these states, is going to help the Republicans, but those states are going to start to lose electoral votes, whereas Arizona, Georgia, Texas, and Florida will gain electoral votes. In Ohio, we're seeing some of that. Remember, Donald Trump carried this by a pretty good margin back in 2016, although turnout in the state was pretty low. Since then, there's been a lot of energy on the Democratic Party. They were able to re-elect Sherrod Brown back in 2018, although on that same ballot, Mike DeWine, the Republican, won. I believe it was against Richard Cordray. Mike DeWine's approval ratings are sky high right now, as he has handled the coronavirus pandemic in Ohio residents' estimation very, very well. And so that, I think, is indicative of the fact that Republicans still hold a pretty good position here. Rob Portman is up, in 2022, so keep an eye on that. The Democrats could pursue that one. Remember, there are a lot of vulnerable Republicans in 2 years. Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, Marco Rubio in Florida, Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania, Richard Burr, North Carolina, Charles Grassley may leave this seat open in Iowa. So there are a number of opportunities for the Democrats before they're very much back on defense in 22. So I think Joe Biden will narrow this up. I think it'll get much closer than it was in 2016. And I also think there's going to be a few minutes on election night where Donald Trump is going to be sweating in this state, where it may look like Joe Biden is actually in the lead for a few hours, but eventually he'll pull away. The Trump campaign is investing ads in this state but that's actually good news for the Democrats. We'll break down why in a little while. Okay, in Wisconsin, remember, there's been a lot of good signs for the Democrats since 2016. This was basically the only state in that election that was like a what? In terms of just how quote-unquote wrong and incorrect and blasphemous the polls were. They weren't. Okay, for the 597,219th time, they weren't wrong. The polls were not wrong. There were 4 states that were projected to go for one candidate and one for the other. One of those, by the way, was Nevada, which was projected to go to Trump. Okay, he led on election day there by 1 point. Okay, so some of those election swings that we all talk about, they kind of went the other way. There were 7 such states that were projected to go for one candidate and then ultimately went to the other in 2008. Okay, and nobody talked about that. They were twice as wrong in 2008. It's that there was a certain mass mainstream media portrayal of what the polls were supposedly showing, and that Donald Trump's unorthodox campaign and his, having never been in office or anything like that, people expected this to be a landslide for Hillary Clinton. Remember, the RCP final projections on election day had Hillary Clinton winning this election in 2016 272 to 266. Folks, that's the closest election in my lifetime, and I imagine a lot of your lifetimes. Okay, that's closer than 04, that's closer than 2000 even, just in terms of electoral vote margins. Okay, so they weren't that wrong. However, they were in Wisconsin, because Hillary Clinton was up by over 6 points on election day. That's why it was so stunning to see Donald Trump actually carry the state. But since then, the Democrats have basically done everything they could have hoped for. They reelected Tammy Baldwin very easily to the Senate by 11 percentage points. She also appeared at the DNC tonight. They ousted Scott Walker, the Republican governor, in 2018, that same night. That was a big win for them. Tony Evers, the Democratic governor, flipped that governorship for them. They also flipped a Supreme Court race here. That was another big one. Remember, that was the same day that the Republican legislature there intentionally limited the amount of polling places. You don't want to take my word for it. If you want to say that's a partisan thing, go ahead. I can tell you it isn't, and I can also tell you that those were literally verbatim the words of the commissioner there that made that happen. Okay, so you don't have to take my word for it. You can take his. All right, and the Democrats still won that. So you can imagine how higher turnout is also going to help them out there as well. And there was also a state Senate special election in Trump's first year in office in the southern portion of the state that the Democrats won and now are representing that district for the first time in decades. All those things in mind, combined with a steady polling advantage, I think gives the Democrats a lean characterization here. That's a big one for them. That's a big sort of mental confidence thing for them to flip this state back. Even though there are other swing states that are worth more votes, obviously the other Rust Belt states, Florida and even Arizona by 1, and North Carolina, Wisconsin has always been on a knife's edge, and it's a state that people have talked about forever as sort of one of those big swing states that everyone pursues every time. So that's a big mental one for them. Michigan. The Republican Party is waving the white flag here. Similarly to Wisconsin, there were 2 statewide races. The Democrats won them both in 2018. Gretchen Whitmer defeated Bill Shute, flipping the governorship from red to blue. She's still facing a Republican legislature there, but that was a big flip for the Democrats. Debbie Stabenow defeated John James, who was expected to speak at the RNC. John James lost by about 5 or 6 points in 2018. He's also losing to Gary Peters, the other Democratic senator, this time around. Furthermore, the Republican Party Donald Trump only won the state by 0.27%, 10,000 votes. Okay, couldn't be much closer than that. And they've pulled their ads out of this state. They've written it off. Okay, Joe Biden's going to win this state. I can say that almost entirely certainly because it'll be close and because you never exactly know with some of these states. I'm only going to label it likely, but I'm kind of tempted to label this a safe Democratic state at this point, which is saying a lot. Pennsylvania, Scrappy Scranton Joe. Okay, that's always what he's been called. He's from there. In 2018, again, I reiterate this, I keep banging this over the head. In these 3 states, the Democrats went 6 for 6, and each of these 3 states had their governorship election up and the Senate race up. Bob Casey won election easily. Tom Wolf won re-election easily. some of these very conservative Republican districts in between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, the Republicans obviously retained them, but they were by some closer margins. The Democratic Party has also made a number of significant overtures to boost turnout in the Philadelphia area in 2020. Okay, and again, a steady polling advantage. I mean, I continue to put this in the Democratic Party's column by a lean margin. I mean, they have every reason to be confident in their ability to win this state. And these three states, if Joe Biden's able to flip these back, combined with 29 in Florida and 11 in Arizona, that would obviously be a very, very successful night for him. Washington, D.C., the most liberal area of the country. Maryland, very safe state. Delaware, safe state, the state that Joe Biden represented for many years. New Jersey, safe Democratic state. We've talked about how the Republicans for some time kind of thought they could get some stuff done. Not anymore. Connecticut, we've also talked about the potential for a long-term flip in that state. Not right now. Rhode Island, easy retention. Massachusetts, we know to pay attention for the Senate race there. That's going to happen, the primary that is on September 1st between Ed Markey and Joe Kennedy. And I expect Ed Markey to win that. New York, safe Democratic state as we know. Vermont, even with the Republican governor, safe state. New Hampshire, it was the closest race in 2016. 2,000 votes. That was the only difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. But again, we've talked about this before. Virtually any state that Hillary Clinton won, you can expect Joe Biden to win. You just can. There's virtually no reason to doubt that this is not going to go the Republican Party's way, or the Democratic Party's way, I'm sorry, and emphatically. Jeanne Shaheen, mind you, is also up for re-election and is easily defeating Kelly Ayotte, the Republican challenger. In 2 years, we've talked about this a couple of times as well. In 2 years, there's another Senate race here between Maggie Hassan and a Republican candidate to be named later, which could be the Governor Chris Sununu, in which event the Republicans might actually win that race and fool a little bit with the balance of power in the Senate. But on the presidential level, I know it's a swing state. I'm labeling it safe. Nothing to talk about. All right, in Maine, the last state here, we are putting Joe Biden here capturing 3 out of the 4 votes, with Donald Trump edging that one out as well. So that's a nice retention for Trump because this was sort of seen as one that he could potentially lose. I do expect Sarah Gideon to defeat Susan Collins in this state, but that's a big retention for him just as he held on to that extra district out here in Nebraska. So there's your map, 318 to 220. As you can tell, this is narrowing up. And I know I've mentioned before how this has narrowed up in recent weeks. But all told, right now, this is only the first time it's actually affected a single state in our characterizations, and that's North Carolina. So Donald Trump, under this model, made up 15 electoral votes with North Carolina. But Joe Biden took back the Rust Belt, Arizona, and Florida. And if he loses North Carolina, which I officially now expect him to, it'll be by less than 1 point. Okay, he's going to come damn close there. Remember, they won that state in 2008. Remember, it's easy to forget how many states the Obama-Biden ticket won. They won Indiana, they won Iowa, they won Ohio, they won North Carolina. They came really close in Missouri. They came really close in North Dakota. They came very close in South Carolina. I mean, don't forget that. So 318 to 220. That's your final map. Again, to sum up, now that the convention's over and we're 75 days away, this is tightening up just a little bit. And it's going to be interesting to see if the convention gives Joe Biden a little bit of a polling bump, which I think he could use right about now. There's reason to believe that he's I think he has a right to be maybe a tad bit nervous about this, just to make sure that there is no overarching theme developing here and that the Republicans are still very well behind, but we've also seen a tightening in some of the Senate polls. And by and large, I think the Democrats remain in a very good position, but let's not totally count it out. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Comment down in the suggestions below. I will answer your questions if you pose them. So please, if you have a question about a particular state, about something I glossed over, if you have a correction to make, okay, I just talked ad nauseum for God knows how long, so I may have made a mistake, please correct me. Okay, please do. Hit the like button, comment down the suggestions below, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.